How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and with last night's first round in the books and the rest of the draft coming later today, starting at 11 Eastern Time, I will be talking about some of the selections from last night's first round, just kind of talking about whether I thought that they were good selections or not so good selections. Overall, I would give my consensus as being I think every team did pretty well for themselves. There's not too many picks that I outright dislike here in the first round of the 2026 draft. Mostly just coming from the fact that I was a fan of nearly every single one of these prospects. So regardless of where they were picked, I don't think that any of these picks necessarily were outright bad, with maybe the exception of one or two that I was less of a fan of, but I can still kind of see the upside of. So just gonna go over those right now. So starting off obviously with Toronto picking Gavin McKenna, that was the correct pick, obviously at number one. So not much to talk about there, but you know that Toronto's going to get a very good player and a very good playmaker, well-rounded offensive talent with Gavin McKenna for the long term. So great start to the draft there. San Jose is going to get Ivar Stenberg again, no surprise there. So another great Swedish winger to kind of fill the gap that they just traded away Eklund for, and also I mean, Stenberg's just got a much higher ceiling. So overall, I mean, you just got to really like what's coming, and then obviously they made a couple other selections that we'll talk about as well. San Jose is going to be very scary in the next few years. Caleb Malholtra to Vancouver. In a lot of ways, this is the right pick because Malholtra has all the tools to be a franchise center for a team. He's just like he really just has every single trait you want in a prospect. Where it becomes a little bit complicated, and where I thought Vancouver might not make this pick is just because obviously they just hired Manny Malhotra to be their head coach. So I didn't think that necessarily they would want a rookie head coach dealing with that type of dynamic. But the silver lining there is obviously Caleb Malhotra is slated to go to Michigan State University. I think it would be in the best interest of everybody to just give him that year of development, not rush him to the NHL on a team that still is lacking a fair bit of talent and poise. So bring him into maybe a better situation at the end of the season or at the start of next season, depending on how things are looking. But overall, I do like this selection a lot. I think Vancouver just needed talent, and I think as far as upside, Caleb Malhotra was the third highest upside of the top group of players in this draft. Buffalo then throws a bit of a curveball, taking Daxon Rudolph, but I don't dislike that pick. Definitely Rudolph was one of the guys I liked a lot, and in one of my later viewings on him in the season, he really kind of cemented himself as being that prospect that I really liked as far as the right-handed defenseman in this draft. Um, I think if you weren't in on Keaton Verhoff, and it seemed like the consensus ended up being a fair bit lower on him by the end, which I'm not fully sure I understand, but I get that that's kind of what happened. Um, you kind of know that Buffalo's MO is they like the big defensemen, so they weren't going to touch Chase Reed. But Daxon Rudolph makes a lot of sense for them as well, and obviously he had that really good playoff run with Prince Albert, where he was probably their best player down that stretch. So definitely had a much more impressive resume to the end of his season, so I can understand the rise there, and I really do like the upside on him. And I think he'll be a pretty solid fit for that Buffalo blue line in the future. And taking him and Merca in back-to-back years really solidifies the fact that that right side of the defense is going to be solid for the next little while, assuming that they don't try to move Merca again. Obviously, there was the rumored trade that he was potentially going to St. Louis for Pareko. Potential that they might kind of pivot and look at another option with him. But either way, I think there's a lot of depth there, which is good. Next up, the Rangers go Albert Smits, and obviously I really like Smits. I think he's a really good shutdown guy. That's a really good quality for the Rangers to have, and also I do think that that defense was definitely the place they needed to address the most. I think the place where I'm the most concerned with Buffalo or with the New York Rangers is that they didn't really have a secondary offensive defenseman for running at the second power play. Um, Once Fox got hurt, like they were pretty much in a situation where they had to run five forwards on both units, or they had to try Gavrikov and Borgen, and neither one of those guys were really a good fit for running a power play. And I don't think Albert Smits really steps into that role either in the next couple of years. So it's something they might have to address here in free agency over the next little bit. Just one thought that I had on that, but overall, I really like the player. I think he adds a lot of quality. Definitely a great shutdown guy long term. So there are definitely things to like about that. Calgary threw a bit of a curveball at me by taking Carson Carls, not because I don't like the player in that position, but um, I was kind of expecting that Calgary was going to go for the top offensive player on the board, so possibly Viggo Bjork. I was wondering, obviously, in my mock draft, I had Caleb Malhotra actually falling to them. Um, I do think they have needs on the left side of the defense, but I think that they've been so focused on building up that defense recently that I wasn't sure if that's something that they needed to address in the immediate right now, essentially. So I do like the player a lot, though. Great skater, two-way player. Has a little bit to grow in terms of being a power play defenseman, but really good just offensive traits in general. Um, and the nice thing is he wouldn't have necessarily the pressure of being a top power play guy right away. Obviously, you're hoping Perek is going to be that guy. Nemec obviously has that upside as well now that they have him. So that kind of takes some pressure off of him, which actually I do like a lot for him. Seattle ends up getting Chase Reed, so that's a lot of people's top defenseman. Personally, I think I had him as my second best defenseman. Really good offensive player. I still think he's a little bit suspect in the defensive game, although he does play a good shutdown role in the neutral zone. Just has to work on a little bit of his defensive zone play. But I think the upside is really good for Seattle, and I thought that they needed to go right defense, and they ended up having a really good one fall into their lap. So obviously, that's a good pick for them as well. Winnipeg, this is one of the few picks in the top 10 that I actually got right. I had them taking Viggo Bjork. Look, I don't think he's a center at the next level, but we'll wait and see what happens there. But I think he's going to be a really good winger. I think his style of play really translates well to the wing in the NHL, regardless. So I think he'd be more effective as a winger than he would as a center, to kind of increase his ceiling a little bit more. Winnipeg really needed that kind of infusion of offensive talent, so great ad to get him there. San Jose, the obvious winners of this draft because they got Ivar Stenberg and then they get my number 3 rated prospect, which is Keaton Verhoff. Verhoff just looks the most NHL ready of any of the defensemen in this draft, with maybe the exception of Albert Smits, but Verhoff also has the higher ceiling. Um, Verhoff just plays every way that you would want a defenseman to play at the NHL level. Like I think San Jose can be patient with him. I think they can wait another year on him and just let him further development in at North Dakota. The other option is you could just sign him now, send him to the Barracuda, and give him a full year of AHL experience. I don't think you need to rush him to the NHL regardless. But I think by the end of the season, either way, we'll probably see him getting some NHL games. Yeah, obviously, just really good value there for the Sharks as he falls to them at 9. Then next up, we got the Nashville Predators. They take Wyatt Cullen. I do like the value there, although I do think that the development curve on Wyatt Cullen is a bit longer than a guy you would typically expect going at 10th overall. But I don't hate that. I think that, like, obviously the ceiling is quite good for him. He's got really good hands. One of the things that kind of prevented him from being higher in boards at the start of the year, people weren't as high as him because he had only just grown to being an NHL caliber size. He was like 5'6" coming into, or just yeah, last season. So he grew over the course of the summer. People weren't really sure what to expect because he wasn't really on the radar last year. And then obviously his talent really took off. Playing at the U.S. development program this past season. And if I do recall, let me just see. I won't click on him because I won't be able to get back right away. But I do know he has committed to it was Minnesota, University of Minnesota. So that's a good place for him to continue his development as well. I think there's some growth for him to come as a more well-rounded player, a guy who handles physicality a little bit better. There's a few highlights of him making dangles that I just know won't work at the NHL level, so you kind of have to take those clips with a grain of salt. But at the same time, he's learned how to use his hands to create space for himself beyond just trying to get around people. So I think there's some really good projectable tools there, and Nashville's just overall looking for those types of guys right now to help rebuild for them long term. St. Louis Blues is another one I predicted. I got Tynan Lawrence going there. Again, this is a very high upside potential player. Obviously, didn't fully get to show it this past season, starting the year injured, and then played quite well at the USHL level. But you got to take that with a bit of a grain of salt because the USHL has become a bit of a weaker development league, but he still flashes talent quite well. And then he goes on to uh, Boston University, less effective there due to having less of a role. So I think this season will be really crucial in the overall development of Tynan Lawrence. I think he has a lot of room to grow as a complete player, but he definitely has the offensive traits to be a good center at the NHL. Next up, we got the New Jersey Devils, and this is the first one I'm going to say is a reach. I am not a huge fan of Alexander Command. I think that there is definite bust potential with this guy. He just, you know, his talent is very raw. I think he's still got a long ways to go in like from being an NHL player. Like he's probably in the closer to like the 3, 4, even maybe 5 year timeline before he makes it. Needs to work on some of his raw physical tools. I like him as a passer. I think he's a decent shooter. Skating skill is pretty good, but I think the IQ just needs to be developed further for me to be convinced that he's going to make it at this level. Next up, we got the New York Islanders selecting Malte Gustafsson. A lot of people were a fair bit higher on him than I was. I think that as far as shutdown guys go, he's a pretty decent option. I think the Islanders are a bit of a weird fit because I think that their defense is pretty stacked with prospects over the next little while. Although I think the jury's out a little bit on Aitchison. I think that he has a lot of talent, but needs to kind of refine his hockey IQ to be an NHL defender. Whereas Malte Gustafsson's kind of the opposite. The IQ is definitely there, and I think there's a little bit more of a talent development that needs to go on with him. I don't think he's outright like a play killer as far as an offensive player, like a guy who's just going to fire the first puck he sees on net to because he panics with it. But I think that there's a certain level of dynamicism that could come along in his game that could turn him into a much better player. But I just don't see that right now. But I think he keeps swinging on these high upside defenders, and eventually a few of them are going to work out and help fill the roles around Matthew Schaefer for the long term. It was cool getting to see Matthew Schaefer announce him out onto the stage and be the first one to greet him. They did mention that Gustafsson apparently sometimes does play on the right, which I wasn't fully aware of. Personally, that's not a strategy that I love. I like to play left defenseman on the left and right defenseman on the right. But for some people, it does work to play them on their off side a little bit. Like obviously Carolina did a fair bit of that because they only had two right defensemen on their roster. So obviously we've seen that it can work. Next up, we've got Columbus taking Oscar Hemming. Again, that's really early for me on Hemming, just because we didn't really see enough of him this past season to warrant a top 15 selection. That being said, you're really gambling on the physical traits and the skill that he kind of flashed a year ago. So that's fair. I just think that his highlights were fairly pedestrian this year as far as prospects go. You're just really banking on a big body power forward, and I do think that Columbus kind of already has that role filled with a few guys like Voronkov, who I think is relatively underrated. And you look at like a lot of the wingers they have who are a bit older right now as well. Like they're all bigger body guys. Like you've got Charlie Coyle, you've got. Now I don't think they're bringing Marchment back, but he'd be kind of another example of that. And then other guys who just play a power game, even though they're a little bit on the smaller side, like Garland as well. So I think it's a bit of an awkward fit, and I think that time will really tell this upcoming season whether or not Hemming looks like the player that everyone thought he was going to be this year, because he certainly wasn't that this year. Yeah, it'll take some time to really evaluate this pick properly. Anaheim comes in with the Mason McTavish trade, and with their first pick, they take Nikita Klipov. I gotta say, I think Anaheim the two of my least favorite moves on this opening night of the draft. I don't mind them moving on from McTavish, and I think that in a vacuum, getting two first round picks for him is actually quite good considering the situation that you were kind of left with at the end of last season, where Quenneville wasn't even trusting him enough to play in the playoffs. So, I think overall you're doing well there. Although I think the upside in McTavish still exists, so I can see why Seattle would be interested in that player, and obviously, or not Seattle, St. Louis, and with St. Louis having four first round picks coming into the night, they're certainly willing to part with a couple of them to get guys who can play in the NHL for them right now. And as they look to fully retool their team, I think McTavish is a good option for them long term. So I think it's a decent move from both teams, but I don't really like what Anaheim did with the picks because they're swinging on upside offensive talent and not these guys who play a very Quenneville-esque game. You're moving on from McTavish because you don't like his effort level, and then you're going to bring in a couple of guys that like don't bring effort really as one of their main traits. Like Klipov is a very offensively gifted player, really good offensive IQ, but the development curve there is going to be fairly long for him to be a capable NHL player because he doesn't defend. He's not really a positioning oriented guy. He's not going to go into the corners. He's a perimeter offensive guy. There's traits to like there, and there's a lot to develop with, but um, it's going to take time on Klipov, like pretty much no matter how you look at it. Then we got the St. Louis Blues. They're going to go Maddox Dagenet, and I really like Dagenet. I think he's a good power center. He is probably one of the guys that I expect to show the most improvement next year in terms of where he's at now because I thought he looked really good, but the stats didn't really show quite how good the tape looked. He was a really dominant force in the QMJHL. I don't know if he's looking to get a college move next season or if he's planning to stay in the QMJHL. I'm hoping for his sake he can move on to the college ranks to further his development because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to continue that development right now in the QMJHL as a big physical forward in a league that doesn't have a lot of guys who handle physicality super well. It would be good to kind of move on and show his physicality against some bigger bodies and some more solid older players. But overall, I really love the upside of this pick. I think the Blues are just in a state right now where it's like just take as much talent as you can, get them into the club. Like obviously, your first pick was a center. You're taking another center here. Although I also think Dagenet has some upside as a potential power winger in the future as well. Um, Impressive skater for a big body. Like a lot of things to like about that player. And then Utah comes up next, and they move up to get Ethan Belchetz. I really love the talent level on Ethan Belchetz. I think he's really fallen here. I think he could have gone top 10. I think he could have easily gone top 15. The fact that he's still available here is probably just due to the late season injury that he sustained. So it'll be interesting to see if teams are more concerned about that than what we actually know publicly. But I think that Belchet's, as far as his tape is concerned, flashed so much talent. He's not necessarily a creator, as I've kind of mentioned on some of my previous videos talking about him. He is very much a finisher on a line, so he's not going to be the guy who creates space for his teammates, but he will create space for himself when holding the puck. Like he definitely uses his strength well to his advantage, and he's an effective skater rather than a particularly quick one. Very physical, a lot of really good traits. The one thing I kind of question a little bit is like he's kind of a better version of what they already have in Dino Boo. So does that make Dino Boo expendable? Does that make them potentially look to move him in a big trade? Because they also obviously moved Paterka last night to get originally pick number 23, and then I think they moved down again. Or no, they yeah they traded for pick 23 and then they acquired Sebastian Kosa with that as well. So, yeah, a few gaps I think that Utah has to fill, but I think Ethan Belchetz is a really high upside guy for the future. Potentially need a couple more right shots because I think a lot of their forwards right now are left shots in that top six. Like we're probably looking at a potential of Lawson Krause playing on the right side for them next year. So just a few other things to kind of think about as we go into the later rounds of this draft. Next up, we got the Washington Capitals. They get good value here, I think, with Oliver Savanto. He's my 11th ranked or 12th ranked prospect. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. I know I had him higher than this, but I had him going lower in my mock draft just because finding a fit for him was a bit awkward. I think sometimes people are a little bit bored of the sure thing third line centers who might have upside of potentially being a decent second line center, and that's kind of what Savanto is. I think he's got a little bit of room to grow offensively, obviously, but he's a very responsible defensive centerman. Really good on faceoffs, which is good to see. The physicality is solid. I don't have much to say about the fit here with Washington. I think that obviously after trading McMichael, they did need to fill a center spot long term. So I think that's probably mainly where this comes from. Although I do think like if you think that Justin Sourdif is going to be a really good third line center for a long term, um, then potentially you don't need a guy like Savanto, but also Sourdif could be a winger as well. So, I think there's some flexibility there. I definitely don't mind the pick at all. Next up, we got the Kings taking the Swedish sniper, I should say, Elton Hermansen, plays the wing. Yeah, I like the upside with that. I think that, they need some more right shots in that offense for sure. I think their biggest need is center, but I think when you look at the board at this stage, like all of the centers with upside have pretty much gone at this point. So, I like them just swinging on the best pro player available, and that's exactly what they got. Next up, we got the Buffalo Sabres taking Ilya Morozov, a guy who has drawn comparisons to Jordan Stahl, for example. So a good time to kind of mention him in regards to a prospect. Ilya Morozov is just your ideal third line center long term. He's just going to be a full shutdown guy. Like he's one of those guys in this first round that I'm like, I look at him and I'm like, yeah, that guy is going to be an NHL player, and we can already pinpoint exactly how he's going to play and where he's going to play. Um, he's going to be a penalty killer, physical, just pure shutdown guy at the next level with a little bit of offensive upside. So he's going to flash that every now and again. But really, the main focus with him is just going to be how he dominates the middle of the ice and checks other teams' top lines. Next up, the San Jose Sharks. They trade up from, I think they were at 27, and they move all the way up to 21 because they want to get Ryan Lynn. So again, it's just another opportunity for San Jose to fill the defense, which has been obviously the biggest talking point coming into this draft. So I think if you told them coming in that they were going to end up with Stenberg, Verhoff, and Ryan Lynn, they'd be absolutely ecstatic about that because Ryan Lynn, I think, has really good two-way upside, but flashes a lot of offensive talent. I think there's going to be a bit of a learning curve for Ryan Lynn to kind of simplify his offense at the next level. Like I don't think he's going to be the quite the same dominant puck mover that he has at the WHL level, but he developed enough defense in the second half of the season to support the way that he plays. That I'm like, yeah, he's a really good prospect that learns quickly that can you know really play any kind of role that you want for him and be adaptable. So I think that overall the Sharks are going to get good usage out of him, whether it's as in a top four role or as a bottom pairing defenseman. I do think that overall he's just going to be another good kind of piece for them long term. Next, Pittsburgh takes one of the Ruck twins. They go with Liam Ruck, and then what's interesting is they didn't make any kind of move to get back into the first round and take the other one. Now, I think they kind of realized that by taking one, you're kind of discouraging any other team from taking the other one, unless that team kind of has a deal in mind to try and acquire somebody from Pittsburgh in order to help them get the other Ruck. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how that works out. But in a vacuum, Liam Ruck, obviously a very talented, albeit limited player. Just he plays a lot to the outside, very perimeter oriented, so very possession and rush based, but doesn't get to the middle of the ice very often. Good power play guy for sure. But I think there's going to be a very interesting learning curve with him as he tries to develop a more complete game with some physicality and you know uh, a little bit more tenacity. So there'll definitely be something there for him to kind of work on, for me to be kind of convinced that he's going to be a good NHL player. But the offensive talent ceiling is obviously quite high, especially if they do also find a way to draft Marcus here in round 2 today. Next up, we got Detroit taking JP Hurlburt, and this is probably one of the steals of the draft for me. I had him ranked 10th on my board. Like, I would have taken him with a top 10 pick. Just really fast, really smart offensive IQ, but also has the forechecking upside to his game as well. He's just a really hard worker overall. Equally a threat to pass the puck as he is to shoot it. So a lot of things to like there, and to give up Kosa for him, like obviously that might set you back a little bit long term. But you also have why am I blanking on his name? Augustine coming as well, great goaltender prospect. So if you're feeling pretty good about Augustine, and you probably should, then that makes Kosa pretty expendable to get a first round pick and a potential, top 6 winger for the future. I think overall that makes a lot of sense for Detroit. Next up, Vancouver gets Adam Novotny, another guy that I expected to go a little bit higher than this just because of his goal scoring ability. He's quite talented in that way, but I do think there's some limitations with the skating, so I think that makes a little bit sense why he could fall a little bit lower. Overall, I think it's a good swing for Vancouver. I think they could be getting a good player with him for sure. Ottawa gets Jonas Lagerberg Hohen, and if you look online, this has been the most hated on pick in the first round of the draft, and I'm here to tell you why it's not a bad pick at all. I think that Jonas Lagerberg Hohen potentially is the hidden gem of this draft, and I felt that way for a very long time. I just didn't think he would get the notoriety to end up in this first round. And for all those people who are saying, "Oh, well, if he wasn't going to go in the first round, then why not trade back for him?" Like, you have to realize that, like, all those public lists of like the consensus rankings and all these things, they're all nonsense, right? Because every team has their own list, and it's like, if you really value a player, you take him because there's no telling where he's going to come off the board. Like, I genuinely think if Ottawa doesn't take him here, he's gone in the second round and you don't have a chance of getting him. And also, you don't necessarily need to trade back in this situation, depending on how you feel about how many picks you have overall in this draft. If you end up with your guys, you end up with your guys, and you're happy with it. Jonas Lagerberg Hohen, in the 9 games that he played in the under 20 league, was the most dominant player in that league. Like, let's not sugarcoat that at all. He had 16 points in 9 games, 9 goals in 9 games. If you watch the highlights, which I'm sure a lot of people did not because they didn't even have him on their radar, like, if you look at prospect lists, they either had him ranked in the third round, or they either didn't have him ranked at all, and that has nothing to do with the player at all, and everything to do with the fact that he got injured in October, and most people just didn't bother to look at him at all. They just either didn't know he existed or wrote him off completely. Anybody who did not rank him at least in the second round, it's because they just didn't watch him. Like, let's just be very clear about that. So Jonas Lagerberg Hohen, probably one of the best upside shooters in this draft, as long as you're not concerned about the injury history, because it was a torn ACL. And obviously any team that would have been in on him would have done their full research on that. Like, I heard late in the year that teams had done their due diligence on the injury and they weren't concerned about it overall. Um, then, like, you're swinging on a guy who could be quite good next year. Like, he's going to be playing in the second tier of Swedish pro hockey next year for the majority of the season. He probably will still see some under 20 games to start the year just because of the way his season ended last year. He'll probably need a little bit more time before he makes that full jump to the pros. But you're talking about a guy who's going to be basically a full-time pro next year, which is going to be nothing but really good for his development. Has a little bit of work to do on his skating, obviously, but I think when you watch the way that he works on a power play, like, his eyes are constantly scanning. He is looking for the best play on the ice. If you give him any space, he takes it and he scores. Um, I think, like, when you think about Ottawa too, like, it reminds me a lot of when they drafted Mark Stone. They were able to get Mark Stone because he was injured for almost the entire season and fell all the way to the 6th round that year. And then they saw what they saw in him, and they were like, yeah, we can take this guy. Obviously, it's a different situation to take a guy like that in the first round, but Jonas Lagerberg Cohen down the stretch was one of my favorite undervalued, lesser known guys in the draft. So good on Ottawa if they looked at that and they felt like this is our guy, we can really turn him into something. Because in that case, I actually really like the value here. Next up, we got Montreal, who goes for Gleb Pugachev, the most physical forward in the draft. So he's going to be a future middle six, probably third line winger who makes opponents really upset that they have to play against him on any given night. He's just a hammer in the corner, and he is going to ruin a lot of days should he make the NHL. There's definitely some development there that needs to happen. His offensive game is not as good as a lot of people would have you believe. People talk about him as being a power forward. I think he's a little bit more similar to a grinder, more of an agitator. There's definitely a little bit of an offensive element to his game, but I think you got to keep in mind he was less than a point a game in the MHL, which is a particularly high offensive league, generally speaking. So you do have to keep those things in mind. But I do also think he's going to play a fair bit in the KHL just because of the element that he brings to his game. Next year, we're going to get to see kind of what he does at that level. Yeah, good one to kind of keep an eye on. I do like his upside as a toolsy NHL player. Just don't think he's going to blow you away with his offense by any means. And here we're going to talk about the player that I really didn't like going in the first round, and that's Maxim Sokolovsky. I saw a good kind of post that really summed it up, which was when all of your highlights are just big hits, you're probably not a first round prospect, and that's kind of how I feel about Sokolovsky. He is not a very, I'm just going to say it, he's not offensively gifted at all. You pass on the puck, he's going to bobble it. He is going to try and send passes up the ice, and he's going to miss a lot of the time. He's going to take two strides out from behind his net, and he's going to already be caught by the forechecker. You don't want the puck to be on Maxim Sokolovsky's stick. That is the biggest thing with him. As a pure shutdown defenseman, there's a lot to like there, honestly. Like, the physicality is actually a really good tool that he uses well. He uses his reach well. He defends well. His positioning is good. A lot of really good defensive traits. Um, there's a lot of things there that remind me of Antoine Saleyev from a couple of years ago, but I think Saleyev did have a little bit more offensive upside in terms of like he was a guy you actually didn't mind carrying the puck for you. I think that's going to be a big limitation for Sokolovsky and something that prevents him from being anything more than a sixth or seventh defenseman at the NHL level. But again, like there's time for him to grow. And obviously, he can't teach size, as they always say. So, there's always the possibility that he could develop into um, you know, something of a useful player in like eventually. And I do think that because obviously the Flyers are shopping Ristolainen, so size is going to be something that they're going to be potentially lacking on their back end in the next little bit. I get it to a degree, but I think that this is a guy I just wouldn't have taken a chance on in the first round. And speaking of players I wouldn't have taken a chance on in the first round, the Anaheim Ducks select Marcus Nordmark, whose biggest question mark is his effort level and consistency. Um, Definitely some offensive talent there, but look, I'm just going to say it. I don't think he has the right mentality on the ice to make it at the NHL level. I think he's going to be a guy who bounces around Europe a little bit, plays quite well over there, and people kind of think, oh, why didn't work in the NHL? But we'll kind of look back at this and we'll remember like the question marks were there from the beginning. Um, and obviously, I could be wrong. Like he could really turn it around. This could be a real motivator for him to change the way he plays the game and show that he is that talented on every single night instead of like half of them. We'll keep an eye on him to see what his development looks like over the next little while. But I think Anaheim has come up and taken two swings on guys that don't play the Quenneville way. And I think they're going to look back at this draft and feel like they could have done a lot better. Next up, we got the Vegas Golden Knights. Juho Piparinen is a solid defensive defenseman out of Finland. Kind of a boring player to watch film on, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that when the defense attacks him, or when the offense attacks him, he shuts it down. But I don't think he offers a whole lot on the offensive side of things either. Um, but unlike a guy like Sokolovsky, you don't hate having him play the puck. Like they showed a great clip last night at the draft of him making a really good pinch to create an offensive opportunity. So there's some definite offensive IQ to his game. It's just the talent isn't necessarily there to match it. So we'll kind of see what happens with him, but I think this is a good spot to take him. Uh, he projects out to be a bottom pairing defenseman of the future, but I think if you get NHL value at this stage of the first round, I think you're pretty happy with that. Calgary takes Jack Hextall, so pure kind of two-way centerman. I think he'll kind of max out as being a shutdown guy, but I think that's a good option for Calgary to have in their toolbox over the next little while. Obviously, they have that, or they've had that for so long with Mikael Backlund, and he's probably only going to be there for a little bit longer until Jack Hextall is eventually able to kind of play that role for them. Then the Nashville Predators trade into the back into the first round to take Tommy Blyle. I think the upside there is really good with Tommy Blyle, and as I was kind of watching some of his highlights last night, I think I was a bit disappointed that I didn't do a little bit more watching of him that over the course of the season because I think there's a really dynamic element to his game. On top of the fact that I think he actually defends relatively well for a pretty offensive guy. So I think Nashville's done well to come back up and get him. And then with the last pick in the first round, the Ottawa Senators take Jackson Cover. Um, my opinion on Cover is I think he's maybe a better story than he is a prospect. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, he only started playing hockey at the age of 13, ice hockey, I should say. He grew up in the Cayman Islands where he played a lot of roller hockey, so a lot of that skill translated over to when he came over and started playing hockey at a high level here. Now, I will say that um, as far as like development from the age of like 13 to your draft year, I think that's when most of your development kind of happens anyways. And obviously, he proved right from a young age that he was capable of being, a high level player that could have these expectations down the road. Um, you look at last season, he was at St. Andrews College and was a pretty average player there, I would say. Like typically when you're talking about a prospect coming out of St. Andrews College, they've really dominated the Canadian high school level. And then you look at him again with London last year. He didn't really dominate there either. He was a good but not great player, I would say, at the OHL level last season. And you can really see it in the highlights that he's very raw. There's a lot of untapped potential, I would say, but I think he's still quite a ways away from kind of meeting that. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what London does with him over the next couple of seasons, if they try to turn him into an offensive force or if they try to make him a well-rounded player. I think his best chance of making it at the next level is to really tap into that well-rounded side and hopefully turn him into that type of player. Yeah, it's definitely a wild card, and I think it's an interesting time to use a first round pick on a guy like that because um, you typically at the end of the first round you want a guy that you kind of know what he is in terms of his style, and I think that Jackson covers a guy who's still figuring out what style he even needs to be, which has its pros and cons, I think. So yeah, I think overall not my favorite pick there, but I think that there's definitely some potential upside. I think potentially the development with him just might take longer than your average first round prospect would, and that's why I probably would have waited to take a guy like him. So overall, I think it was a pretty good draft for most teams. I just really like the prospects in this draft overall. I think that as far as, the best pick in the first round, it might go to Ethan Belchet's to Utah, but I think that maybe the fit might be a bit awkward there. Keaton Verhoff has a very good chance of being the best player or best value pick in this first round. Vigo Bjork as well to Winnipeg, I really like as well. They get the benefit of every team before them essentially just really needing defense. So definitely a lot of fun names to keep an eye on, and with round two starting again today, like there's going to be some fun players to also keep our eyes on. My current top 10 remaining on the board includes Adam Valentini, who I had ranked 15th. Uh, they've got Villeneuve, Xavier Villeneuve, I had ranked 20th. Georgios Pantelis, 24th. Lavor Gashelov, I had ranked 26th. The other Ruck twin, Marcus, 28th. Brooks Rogowski, 29th. Nicholas Aram Olsen, and also Thomas Sharenko are some of the big names to kind of keep an eye on as we go into round two today.